RRF Caserta.
South Italy, in English language.
Imagine a war being fought in Eastern Europe. But the outcome of that war, like whether troops get ammunition or if cities actually get air defense, is entirely decided by the price of crude oil flowing out of the Middle East.
Right, which sounds like some kind of crazy geopolitical thought experiment.
Yeah, exactly. But that is the literal reality of the world today. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at the ultimate global domino effect, untangling how a completely separate crisis in the Persian Gulf is, fundamentally rewriting the rules of the war in Ukraine.
It's just a profound shift in how global power operates. I mean, we're watching the traditional boundaries of these regional conflicts just completely dissolve in real time.
Yeah. And to give you a sense of where we are, today is April 1st, 2026. This marks day 1498 of the war in Ukraine. But our mission today isn't just to look at the trenches.
No, definitely not.
We are synthesizing this massive stack of international reporting. We've got dispatches from the BBC, the Italian daily La Repubblica, various French news outlets, and Ukrainska Pravda.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It is. And just a quick note, as we dive into this, we are going to be looking at some highly polarizing moves from global leaders.
Right, specifically U.S. President Donald Trump and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
Exactly. And we really want to make it clear, we aren't here to endorse their politics or pick sides or anything like that. Our job today is strictly to decode the geopolitical mechanics behind these headlines, impartially reporting the facts and the ideas just as they're presented in our sources.
Which is a crucial distinction. We're analyzing the plumbing of international relations. So when leaders make these controversial moves, we want to look at the immediate mechanical impact those levers have on the global system.
Right. So let's start with the biggest lever currently being pulled. The catalyst that's disrupting everything right now is a massive shift in priorities from the U.S. administration.
Yeah, and it all ties back to the Middle East.
Exactly. So according to a Financial Times report, which is heavily cited across our Italian and French sources, by the way, President Trump has issued this blunt ultimatum to European countries. The U.S. is threatening to cut off weapons supplies to Kyiv unless Europe joins a military coalition to free the Strait of Hormuz from Iran.
Which is, it's a total recalibration of American foreign policy.
It's wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because for decades, the U.S. operated on this doctrine of separate operational theaters, right? European security was handled by NATO, while Middle Eastern security had its own entirely distinct set of alliances and objectives.
Right, they didn't mix.
Exactly. And this ultimatum completely collapses that separation. It essentially ties the survival of Eastern Europe directly to a shipping lane in the Persian Gulf.
That is the part I find so hard to wrap my head around. The U.S. is essentially telling its European allies that their security umbrella against Russia is now conditional on their military participation in an entirely different conflict against Iran.
Yeah, it forces a brutal reckoning for European defense planners.
No.
The logic being deployed by Washington is highly transactional here.
Oh, so?
Well, Trump has simultaneously stated that the U.S. shouldn't have, quote, gotten into Ukraine, arguing that the countries actually receiving the oil that flows through the Strait of Hormuz should be the ones footing the bill to protect it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this pressure campaign, it's already yielded results. It actually forced a joint statement from France, Germany, and the UK back on March 19th.
And the timeline here is incredibly aggressive, too. Trump is saying the U.S. will launch extremely hard strikes on Iran in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Right. But Iran is not backing down at all.
Not even a little bit. The sources note they are flat out refusing to open the strait, dismissing Trump's actions as just meaningless performances. So if Washington is tying its Eastern European support to a Middle Eastern bottleneck, how is this actually playing out on the battlefield in Ukraine?
Well, it creates an almost impossible structural trap for Kyiv.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to the mechanics of global energy markets.
Right, because everything runs on oil.
Exactly. Because of the conflict with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the global supply of oil is heavily constrained right now, which is sending energy prices soaring worldwide.
Which leads to this detail in the BBC reporting that it completely inverts traditional military doctrine.
Oh, the energy infrastructure stuff.
Yeah. The BBC reports that Ukraine's own allies have asked President Zelensky to scale back or basically reduce their attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. They are actively asking Ukraine not to blow up Russian oil facilities just to prevent further oil price spikes.
It's a huge paradox.
I have to admit, I find this baffling. Like, how is a country supposed to fight a war for its literal survival when the allies supplying its weapons are demanding they protect the enemy's oil exports?
It really highlights how global inflation is essentially being weaponized. You have to look at the domestic mechanics of the country supplying Ukraine, right?
Okay, lay that out for me.
So the West relies on stable global oil markets to maintain the political support of their own voting populations. If a Ukrainian drone strike takes a massive Russian refinery offline, the price of Brent crude spikes.
And when crude spikes, the cost of gasoline in London or Paris or Chicago just shoots up.
Exactly. High gas prices inevitably lead to angry voters, which translates directly into intense political pressure on Western leaders to just end the war, even if that means forcing Ukraine into really unfavorable terms.
So Ukraine is caught in this vicious cycle. I mean, crippling an enemy's economic engine is usually the core objective of war, but here it is a massive liability because it alienates the very countries keeping Ukraine armed.
The West wants Ukraine to win, but they are demanding this highly sterilized version of warfare, like a war that defeats Russia without disrupting the global economy.
Which is impossible.
Right. In a grinding war of attrition, executing that kind of sterilized, inflation-proof strategy is virtually impossible.
And the satellite imagery proves Ukraine isn't fully playing along with the sterilized version either.
No, they definitely aren't.
BBC Verify just published imagery showing these huge fires still raging at 3 key Russian oil export facilities near the Baltic Sea. But, this structural trap actually explains a major pivot I did not see coming when I was reading the source material.
The Middle East pivot.
Yes. With the U.S. distracted and Europe terrified of the price of oil, Ukraine is turning to the very region causing the global distraction.
It is a fascinating evolution in their diplomatic strategy. When your traditional support structures become conditional or, unstable, you are forced to seek out entirely new partnerships.
And the sources show Zelensky is aggressively working the phones. He's calling U.S. envoys like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and he's talking to Senator Lindsey Graham and the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, trying to lock down a firm document on security guarantees for what he's calling a dignified peace.
Right, he's covering his bases in the West.
But simultaneously, he is physically touring the Middle East. He has visited Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, and he is signing 10-year defense cooperation agreements with these Gulf countries.
Which is just a brilliant piece of realpolitik.
But I'm looking at this and wondering, what does a war-torn country in Eastern Europe have to offer some of the wealthiest nations in the Middle East?
They are offering the most valuable commodity in modern warfare: proprietary, battle-tested data. Yeah, the specific focus of these 10-year agreements is air defense and countermeasures against missiles and drones.
Specifically, Iranian Shahed drones, right?
Yes. Exactly. Ukraine is not just offering generic military advice here. They possess 1,400 days of the world's most advanced, hard-won telemetry on intercepting Iranian drones.
So they have the actual data.
Exactly. We are talking about acoustic signatures, radar cross-sections, and electronic warfare vulnerabilities. And the Gulf states are terrified of these exact same drones threatening their own infrastructure.
So Ukraine is executing a masterful technology transfer.
Right. They are essentially telling the Gulf, the U.S. might be pulling back, but we have the bleeding-edge expertise you need to survive an Iranian drone swarm. And in exchange, Ukraine secures long-term capital and strategic alliances outside the traditional Western bloc.
Wow. They are attempting to transition from being this dependent client state into a sovereign exporter of security technology.
Exactly.
But while Ukraine is performing this incredibly complex diplomatic pivot, the European Union is just fracturing under the dual pressure of the Ukraine war and the Hormuz crisis.
Oh, it's a mess.
I'm reading through these European responses, and they seem completely contradictory. Like, how does a union function when its members seem to be working against each other?
Well, you have to view the European Union not as a single monolith, but as a consensus-based coalition, which makes it highly susceptible to internal friction when real pressure is applied.
Okay, let's break down the two sides of this fracture then. On one side, the BBC reports a unified, aggressive stance.
Right, with Germany and the UK.
Yeah. A resurgent German military is stepping up to become Europe's preeminent military power to protect the eastern edge. And the EU as a whole is transferring 1.4 billion euros in revenues from frozen Russian assets directly to Ukraine.
Which is a huge financial move.
Definitely. And you have the UK authorizing its armed forces to physically board and seize sanctioned Russian shadow fleet oil tankers. Let's pause on that for a second.
Sure.
The term shadow fleet gets thrown around a lot in the news. How does a massive 100,000-ton oil tanker just operate in the shadows?
It is a really complex maritime shell game. So when Western sanctions banned the purchase of Russian oil at market prices, Russia essentially amassed a fleet of aging, decrepit tankers.
Okay.
And to hide their movements, these ships engage in dark activity. They turn off their automatic identification system, or AIS, which is the global tracking transponder that's literally required for commercial vessels.
So they just go dark on the radar.
Right. And they falsify their insurance documents. They sail under flags of convenience from countries with lax maritime laws. And this is the crazy part. They conduct incredibly dangerous ship-to-ship oil transfers in the middle of the ocean.
Wait, like pumping crude oil between moving ships?
Yes, just to obscure the origin of the crude. So the UK authorizing its military to physically board these rogue vessels in their waters, that is a massive escalation in enforcing the economic blockade.
So you have the UK sending troops onto rogue tankers and Germany heavily militarizing. But then on the other side of the fracture, you have Hungary.
Right, the internal friction.
Yeah. According to French sources, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has completely blocked a massive 90 billion euro EU loan to Ukraine. His leverage is just explicit.
He's not hiding it at all.
Not at all. He has stated he will only help Ukraine when we have our oil, directly referencing shipments of Russian crude. And he didn't stop at the veto. He ordered the seizure of millions of euros from a Ukrainian bank in Budapest, which Zelensky openly called banditry.
Yeah, the Italian papers are even reporting shock in Brussels over allegations that Orban's minister is acting as a mole for Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
It's like Europe is trying to drive a fire engine to a burning building, but one of the passengers in the back seat keeps pulling the emergency brake and demanding gas money.
That is exactly what it's like.
But how can one country completely freeze a 90 billion euro initiative that the rest of the continent wants?
Think of the European Union Council like a joint bank account that requires every single account holder to turn their key at the exact same time to release any funds.
Oh, wow.
Right. In many major foreign policy and financial decisions, the EU requires unanimous consent from all its member states.
So it only takes one person refusing to turn their key to paralyze the entire system.
Exactly. And that's exactly the dynamic Russia relies on. Moscow doesn't need to defeat the entirety of NATO or financially outmuscle the entire European Central Bank. They just need to find leverage over one single member state.
Just one weak link.
Right. By tying European financial aid for Ukraine to Hungary's domestic dependence on Russian oil, Russia has effectively outsourced its political disruption. Orban's veto power becomes a highly efficient, asymmetrical weapon for Moscow, essentially weaponizing the EU's own democratic rules against itself.
That's incredible. But, while all this geopolitical maneuvering happens in the boardrooms, like Trump threatening Europe, Orban holding up billions, Zelensky touring the Gulf, we have to ground this deep dive in the physical reality of April 1st, 2026.
Right. Day 1498.
Day 1498. The statistics reported by Ukrainska Pravda for just a single day of fighting are difficult to comprehend. The Ukrainian military reports taking out 1,300 occupying soldiers and destroying 59 artillery systems in one 24-hour period.
The sheer volume of material and human attrition after 4 years of sustained industrial warfare, it's just staggering.
It really is.
But it's the technological evolution of this violence that is truly unprecedented.
Yeah, the French sources highlight the scale of the drone war right now. Moscow claims to have shot down nearly 400 Ukrainian drones in a single night. 400.
It's a massive escalation.
And both President Zelensky and former U.S. General David Petraeus are warning about a rapidly approaching reality defined by autonomous drone swarms. I mean, what makes a swarm different from just launching 400 remote-controlled airplanes at once?
Well, the main difference is autonomy and communication. Early in the war, drones were individually piloted via radio links, right? by a human.
Right.
But a swarm operates on a mesh network. These drones are powered by artificial intelligence, allowing them to communicate with each other in the air without a human pilot directing every single move.
Wait, so they talk to each other?
Exactly. If one drone detects a radar signature, it instantly shares that telemetry with the other 399 drones. They dynamically reroute, they overwhelm air defenses through coordinated saturation, and they autonomously select targets. We are basically witnessing this terrifying transition from mechanized warfare to algorithmic warfare.
That feels like science fiction. And the human cost of this algorithmic war is pulling in people from thousands of miles away, too. Like, a Russian An-26 military plane crashed into a cliff in occupied Crimea, killing all 29 people on board in what authorities called a technical malfunction.
Right.
But the casualties aren't just Russian or Ukrainian anymore. The BBC reports that Zimbabwe has announced 15 of its nationals were killed fighting for Russia. How do citizens of Zimbabwe end up dying in a trench in Eastern Europe?
It's incredibly bleak. It reveals the dark mechanics of the global recruitment pipeline. Because as Russia burns through its domestic manpower, they have increasingly turned to the global south to feed the meat grinder.
Take advantage of people.
Exactly. They exploit economic vulnerabilities, often luring young men from Africa, South Asia, or the Middle East with these deceitful contracts. These men are promised lucrative civilian jobs in construction or logistics inside Russia.
And then what happens?
Well, once they arrive, their passports are confiscated, and they are forced into signing military contracts, effectively becoming trafficked mercenaries pushed to the absolute front zero of the combat zones.
God, it is an incredibly grim reality. And alongside the physical war, the information war remains just as fierce.
Oh, absolutely.
Russia has banned an Oscar-winning documentary titled Mr. Nobody Against Putin, with the court declaring it promotes negative attitudes toward the government.
Right.
Meanwhile, BBC Russian is celebrating 80 years of broadcasting defiance. Even with their website officially blocked, millions of citizens inside Russia are using VPNs and mirror sites just to access the reporting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a massive disconnect between these sterile debates over naval coalitions and frozen funds in the capitals of the world and this lethal, autonomous, deeply globalized reality on the ground. The conflict has evolved so far beyond a regional border dispute.
It really has. Let's step back and look at the massive web we've just untangled today. Why does any of this matter to you listening right now?
That's the big question.
It matters because we are living in an era where distance no longer provides insulation. A blocked shipping lane in the Middle East restricts the flow of global crude oil.
Right.
That restriction spikes the cost of energy, which creates domestic political pressure on Western leaders.
Yep.
That pressure causes them to threaten the supply of artillery shells to Eastern Europe, which in turn forces the Ukrainian president to fly to the Gulf to trade proprietary drone technology for capital. The entire system is interlocked.
Which leaves us with a rather profound concept to consider as we look toward the future.
What's that?
Well, we are seeing major powers use supply chain choke points and veto mechanisms as standard tools of geopolitical blackmail. We are seeing the deployment of autonomous AI swarms and the global trafficking of mercenaries. It really raises the question, are we moving toward an era where localized wars no longer have clear endpoints?
Oh, wow, like they just don't stop.
Right. Instead of treaties and decisive victories, do these conflicts simply become permanent, heavily managed features of the global economic system? A perpetual state of low-boil warfare that markets and citizens just learn to price into their daily lives.
The chessboard doesn't just have different rules. The pieces are permanently glued to the board. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the geopolitical mechanics shaping our world. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the hidden connections, and we will catch you next time.
RRF Caserta. South Italy in English language.